You probably have.
I was just going to mention you had your helmet still. I don't know.
Take the flak jacket off.
Hi, Julie. Yeah.
No, he's a absence, leave of absence. No. Please.
Recording in progress.
You can join by video.
Good morning and welcome to this meeting of council. The acknowledgement of country is to be given by Councillor Gibson this morning.
I acknowledge that we meet here on the lands of the Camaragal people. This land was never ceded, so always was, always will be Camaragal land. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. We have applications from Councillor Mutton to attend remotely and a leave of absence for Councillor Lapouris. Both of those moved by Councillor Gibson, seconded by Councillor Spenceley. I'll put that to the meeting. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Are there any disclosures of interest in relation to the item on the agenda for the extraordinary meeting? No. This meeting is being recorded and made publicly available on Council's website. Those present should refrain from making any defamatory statements. By attending the meeting, you are giving consent to your image and voice being webcast. Councillors, council staff and members of the public must ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent during meetings of council, and councillors who need to use their phone to text, talk or engage in social media activity must leave the chamber to do so. Councillors, we have an application from 5 speakers this morning. And Councillor Berrigan.
Madam Mayor, I move that we open the public forum to allow the speakers to address the meeting prior to the debate occurring.
Seconded by Councillor Spenceley. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. The first registered speaker is Sarah Coe. If you would please come forward and give your name.
Speakers on.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Sarah Coe and I'm a resident of Cremorne. The state government's reforms will have a significant impact on the lives of thousands of people in our community. Discovering a formal document from council to the Department of Planning, marking Neutral Bay with a yes for inclusion rather than a no for request to exclude, has caused a lot of concern amongst the community. And this is exacerbated by the fact that this information was not proactively disclosed to the community, and if not for today's meeting, may have always remained hidden. I support the motion and believe it is essential that council formally withdraws the response of 15th of May regarding Neutral Bay and amends the maps of supermarkets, which is factually incorrect. Council should submit a new response that's consistent with the council resolution and that comprehensively justifies why Neutral Bay is not suitable for inclusion. And the justifications should be framed around the department's assessment criteria. The paper released yesterday by Council claimed that council officers assess Neutral Bay to meet the department's criteria. I strongly disagree with this assessment. Let's just look at one of the criteria, infrastructure. Council claims this criteria is satisfied, but where is the evidence? One of the key issues with the state government's one-size-fits-all reforms, as stated in Council's resolution, is that it does not address local infrastructure capacity, delivery of utilities and social infrastructure. So where is Council's actual assessment? Locals know that our roads, schools, green spaces and public transport systems are strained. It's unclear to me as to how it can be concluded that Neutral Bay meets the infrastructure criteria without any evidence. In fact, all evidence suggests that we are infrastructure constrained. Further, to positively implement the council resolution, the task should be to find all possible reasons to justify the exclusion of Neutral Bay. I urge council to frame their new response in this manner. The Brightmoor precinct has provided examples of justifications in a letter to the Mayor dated 15th of May. I now turn to the government's policy refinement paper. This paper was also not publicly disclosed until yesterday. This is a really important paper. It's dated 29th of April. It reveals that some councils have been advocating really hard for their communities and gained some relief for those located in the R1 zone. These councils have argued that allowing residential flat buildings in these areas where there are 1 to 2 story dwellings will cause jarring transitions and adverse amenity impacts. And the Department of Planning has actually listened to these councils and agreed to provide relief to these areas. They've agreed to apply the low-rise controls to these areas, that is manor houses and multi-dwellings of up to 9.5 metres, rather than 22-metre high apartment blocks, which is a great outcome for those communities. I therefore have one additional request. I ask councillors to please consider including in the motion an amendment that council strongly advocates for the same relief for our community, specifically for those areas zoned R3, where the current planning controls provide for 1 to 2 story dwellings of up to 8.5 metres that comprise a lot of townhouses, which actually provides housing diversity for our community. And exactly the same issues of jarring transitions and adverse amenity impacts will apply if 7-story apartment buildings are allowed to be located in these areas. In closing, I thank Councillor Burke and Councillor Spenceley for initiating this important meeting, and I thank all councillors for coming here today at 9 o'clock today. I also thank council staff for working through this issue with all of us. Thank you.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Thank you for your...
Sorry, Mayor. Yeah, just a quick question. Thank you, Ms. Coe. Could you just repeat the extra point you were requesting there a little slower?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry, I was speaking very quickly. Yes, so in the policy refinement paper, there is a description of the relief that the Department of Planning is proposing to allow for these particular LGAs. And the relief is specifically to those areas where they're within the 800-metre zone from a town centre or a train station, and they are characterised by 1 to 2 story dwellings. And if the government's reforms as is were applied to those areas, these areas would get 7-story apartment blocks or the 5-story, depending on where they are, in those areas next to 1 to 2 story houses. So the government has said, okay, well, for those areas, we'll apply the low-rise controls, which means the manor houses, which are apartment blocks, and multi-dwellings, which are townhouses, of up to 9.5 metres. So it provides an increase in density, so pretty much 3 stories, but it's a much more compatible density in the local context of those areas. And I think it increases density, but the communities also will be more accepting of those levels of density compared to 7 stories next to a 1-story dwelling. And so what I'm asking for is for the same thing for North Sydney Council to advocate for the same thing for our R3 zones, where it's always been zoned for 8.5 metres, and it's characterised by townhouses, semi-detached and some small cottages on very small lots. So it's already dense but low scale in nature. So please, I ask you to please fight for that for our R3 zone lands across our LGA.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Gibson.
So how did you first become aware of this? Because this is taken, I've just come back from holiday and this has absolutely taken me by surprise.
I became aware of this because I read an article in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 29th of May, and it mentioned the policy refinement paper, which really piqued my interest.
Yeah.
And I then I found it on the Ku-ring-gai Council website. They had tabled it at a council meeting and the paper was on there, so I was able to read it then.
Good.
But it was dated 29th of April.
Okay, and do you know, so that you're talking about the other LGAs that have already communicated their desires, so that includes Ku-ring-gai, any other LGAs that you are aware of?
So the paper lists all the LGAs with this R1 zone.
Yeah,
And those areas, it seems, this paper suggests that those areas will get that relief for those parts of their LGA.
okay, good, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Anita O'Toole. If you two would come forward, please.
Councillors, my name is Anita O'Toole and I've lived in Neutral Bay all my life. I won't reveal the length of those years, they are many. And I've seen it change over the years into a community-based, amenable suburb with strong ties to residents and the well-being of people paramount to all. And I'm quite dismayed at the proposed changes. As I look at the criteria for the proposed density, I find that really only one of the criteria is met partially, which is essential infrastructure. I find that the second criteria, which is road infrastructure, we know that Military Road is just chock-a-block. It was voted by the NRMA in 2023 as the second worst road in Sydney. So clearly, with the closure of the Ernest Street entry to the Harbour Bridge as part of the upgrade, Ring Freeway upgrade, the traffic congestion is going to be monumental. And further, with the cessation of the Beaches Link project, the area is going to be quite gridlocked into the future. The third criteria being quality of train services simply doesn't exist. Quality of bus services, the stress on our existing bus services, which are subjected to the whims of Military Road, will again be profoundly affected. And then number 5, the level of services. We are quite undeveloped in that area. We have no shopping mall, we have no transport hub, we have no hospital, we have no high school. We have what, apart from Skeggs, whose fees are between $30,000 for kindergarten and $50,000 for year 12. We have no other high school. We have no library, swimming pool, town hall or cultural centre. So I simply can't understand how we've met the criteria and how Council's decision on February the 12th, rejecting Neutral Bay's inclusion in the zoning, in the new zoning, can metamorphosize into a yes. We will be included. So I speak on behalf of many of my neighbours and long-term residents of the area who are quite dismayed at this outcome and lack of transparency. Yes. So I thank you for listening to my proposal. I strongly suggest that we resubmit a position rejecting Neutral Bay and Cremorne's inclusion.
Are there any questions of the speaker? Thank you for your participation. The next speaker is Thomas Mackenzie. If you would come forward too.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Mackenzie. First up, thank you, Councillor James and William, for requesting this urgent extraordinary meeting at Council. This is all about protecting the future of Neutral Bay and Cremorne. Back in February, our council made a clear resolution to keep Neutral Bay and other town centres out of the state council government's plans for major density increases. This resolution was aimed to protect our communities from unreasonable and unsustainable hikes in density that have not been underpinned by any infrastructure analysis or planning. But guess what? In May, despite our council's resolution, council officers went ahead and marked neutral bay for inclusion in a response to the Department of Planning. This is totally against our council's lawful resolution. It's a huge concern and not an isolated incident. Why is this a big deal for a community? Well, our infrastructure is already stretched thin. Our roads are jam-packed, especially Military Road, which is one of the worst for congestion. We don't have a public high school in Cremorne or Neutral Bay. A public high school is in Mosman. Our primary schools are bursting at the seams. Children have hardly any space to play outdoors. Plus, our bus services are often overcrowded and delayed, meaning many long queues on Military Road to get into the city and beyond. There's no rail or metro coming to Neutral Bay. Most people will definitely have cars, and even if they have access to the bus, the government's proposals, if imposed on Neutral Bay and Cremorne, will simply worsen the congestion and make it unlivable for our current and future residents. Whilst we have supermarkets, Neutral Bay lacks a deep range of goods and services. Residents have to travel out of the area to source goods and services such as hardware, homewares, electronics, office apparel, to go to swimming, to the library, to watch a concert, to play, or even come to a council meeting. Another point that should be highlighted to the Department of Planning is the fact that Neutral Bay and Cremorne are already 76% apartments based on the Australian Bureau of Statistics data. This is a very high percentage. It is the same as the figure for the North Sydney LGA. It is only 3% below the City of Sydney's figure. By comparison, ABS reports that Woollahra is only 56% apartments and Inner West is only 42%. If Neutral Bay is included in the state government's density plans, our housing diversity will be reduced even further, eroding housing choices for our families. There's also a major issue that the policy refinement paper and council's response to the Department of Planning on town centre selections was never tabled at council's meeting or published in council's website. The community have purposefully been kept in the dark, whereas Ku-ring-gai Council, on the other hand, have disclosed all information with transparency at council meeting. Our community deserves the same level of transparency and respect. We also need an independent investigation as to why the council submitted a council response that went against a lawful council resolution and undermined it. The community needs assurance that there has been no corruption or coercion or willful dishonesty in the council's representations to the community. Such actions will be deemed underhanded and devious and will be called out.
That's your 3 minutes. If you would finish your.
Okay, I think I'll
Well,
move
I've-
for an
I've- it's
extension
all
of
right.
time.
Thank you. If you continue.
Thank you. Turning to our immediate priorities, we need to rescind the initial response to the Department of Planning and submit a new response that contains quality justification as to why Neutral Bay isn't suitable for inclusion, that address the Department of Planning's assessment criteria, and time is of the essence and needs to be done as soon as possible, listening to those that live here. In closing, I urge councils to represent our community and to fight hard and to protect Neutral Bay and Cremorne's future. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Anne Little. You would come forward, please.
Hi, thank you. My name's Anne Lytle, and I've been a resident and property owner in Cremorne and North Sydney Council for 20 years. I represent Strata Plan 5996. I'm the secretary, 24 units, about 55 residents. And we agree and strongly support the motion to rescind the erroneous response to DPHI and replace it with one that reflects the elected councillor's resolution and the voice of the community to not include Neutral Bay as a town centre precinct. If a new comprehensive response on this issue is not delivered in time, is inadequate, or lacks comprehensive, solid justifications addressing the DPHI criteria on which the exclusion will be assessed, the result on the Military Road corridor will be catastrophic. I implore the councillors in this room to provide the necessary oversight to ensure what is resubmitted is of the content and quality necessary to accomplish this objective. Otherwise, the whole exercise will be a waste of all of our time. I'd like to briefly comment on two issues. My pet issue, road congestion, which is one of the core criteria for DPHI. I know this has been brought up by other speakers. Neutral Bay and Cremorne are entirely dependent on roads. There is no rail, and we are the main thoroughfare for the entire Northern Beaches. And this is not going to change. Buses are already oversubscribed, and adding more buses simply creates further congestion. We know that the Warringah Freeway upgrade is going to make things worse because more cars are going to be rerouted from Ernest Street onto Military Road. The choked roads in this corridor already reduce the quality of living for current residents. Ask anyone who actually lives here. Increases in the density of the scale proposed by the state government and the associated increase in road congestion will make this area unlivable for future generations. My second comment is on something on which I have some level of expertise. I am a professor of management and leadership. In my view, it's a major governance failure that the council staff were able to submit a response contrary to a council resolved position, and of which the community was not informed or aware. This is not the first time the community has been blindsided and negatively impacted by the mistakes, oversights, or decisions made by council staff. The fact that these decision outcomes are similarly skewed in favor of developers begs the question of why. Is it incompetence, corruption, coercion, or something else? The community feels abandoned and has lost trust in the council who is supposed to represent us, and we want answers. If there's been no wrongdoing, then councillors and council leadership should not be afraid of a formal investigation into this issue as well as others. The importance of an independent, not internal investigation cannot be understated. We are sick of the lack of communication and transparency, as well as the web of complex excuses and justifications made by senior council leadership when serious problems are exposed. It's unacceptable, and the community deserves and demands better. In sum, first, we need to act quickly to provide a new response to DPHI that strengthens and justifies the exclusion of Neutral Bay. This needs to happen now. No excuses. This matter affects thousands of people in our community now and in the future. But more importantly, the community calls for a formal investigation into this issue, not only to provide answers, but to make sorely needed changes in the governance structures, systems, and processes to ensure greater transparency and accountability to the community that the council is supposed to represent. We've had enough, and the community deserves better.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker?
Can I say, how did you first become aware of this?
I've become aware of it through discussions with other concerned residents.
Yeah, and when did you become aware of it? Just really recently? Just
quite recently.
Yeah. Because as a councillor, I was also unaware of it.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you for your participation. The final speaker is Meredith Trevelyan-Jones. If you would come forward, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. My name is Meredith Trevelyan-Jones. I'm a resident of Cremorne. It is right that we're here this morning because what has happened is very wrong. I thank councillors Spenceley and Burke for this notice of motion. I have spent the last few days fielding phone calls from local residents who attended a precinct meeting where this issue was raised, residents who have heard from someone they know or from social media, residents I've never previously spoken to. Without exception, they are appalled and angry about what has happened. I have read the Chief Executive Officer note that accompanies the notice of motion. It would appear that no councillor was aware of the feedback form sent out by the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure or of the response given until very recently. This was a case of council officers acting independently and contrary to council's position. According to the CEO note, council officers were conflicted in making an assessment. Well, if they were conflicted, well, why didn't they seek a direction from someone at a more senior level? Or why didn't they say, I'm not prepared to fill this out at this point of time? They could have said no, noting Neutral Bay supermarkets, but pointing to things that do not meet the criteria. The department's refinement policy states that a supermarket is the best indicator that other services and amenities will be available, including parks. There are no parks within Neutral Bay mixed-use zone. Neutral Bay Village has the least access to parks of any part of North Sydney. In terms of transport, by the way, a forum hosted by Zali Stegel last month and attended by the Minister for Roads suggested one way of improving transport solutions for Warringah would be cutting out the B-line bus stop at Neutral Bay. I guess the lines of passengers at Neutral Bay trying to get a bus are causing delays in the service. Council officers supposedly did not complete the form on the basis it was to be an official and formal nomination form. Well, I'm sorry, it's in writing, it's official and it's formal. We told no recommendation was made by council officers in relation to Neutral Bay, as nothing was filled in under the heading recommendation. But under the heading council response include ? The answer given is yes, in capital letters, followed by as per criteria only, contrary to council resolution. The word yes looks like a clear recommendation. This doesn't look like council officers deferring the issue to a meeting. Council officers put up some sort of argument at the meeting with the department, but the only record is the form that was submitted. We are told there was no intentional undermining of council's resolved position. With the benefit of hindsight, the feedback form should have been expressed differently. Well, I thought senior professional officers are meant to have some foresight as opposed to hindsight. It seems to me that what we are seeing is a level of judgment well below what would be expected from an officer operating at a senior level. An appropriate letter needs to go to the department. It needs to make clear that the feedback that was given was not authorised by council and expressly against council's resolution, and also say the responsible officer or officers have been disciplined. Otherwise, I suspect there is little chance of Neutral Bay not being nominated as a town centre precinct. The written feedback given by council officers will be the final nail in the coffin of Neutral Bay's selection as a town centre precinct. The planning officers responsible will move on with their careers, leaving the residents they were meant to be serving and protecting to pay the price. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker?
And again, can I ask when and how you became aware of this fiasco?
I was asked to attend a Brightmoor precinct meeting on Wednesday night, and Sarah Coe was
Just last Wednesday night?
last Wednesday
Yeah.
night, and Sarah Coe was a speaker. Councillor Spenceley was there at the same time. I think everybody in the room was totally taken by surprise.
So same as me.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Spenceley?
No, sorry.
No. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
If you could, just as you leave, turn off the. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Spenceley has.
I think I just wanted to move the motion. Mayor,
Okay,
if I may.
the motion as written.
I'll make an amendment if I may, which is to include the wording suggested
Just
by.
wait for the minute taker to
sorry.
bring it up.
And the North Sydney Council strongly writes to apply for the same relief granted to other councils for the R3 zone, which is predominantly 1 to 2 stories, 8.5 metre houses, seeking an exemption for, what is that? I think for 17 and 27 metre, whatever the correct metres are.
Well, I think you should just say that the exemption from the mid-rise.
From the mid-rise, low and mid-rise, sorry, mid-rise, and then
mid-rise.
count as low-rise.
Sorry, if you go back, not lower, just.
Yeah, not lower,
Exemption from
mid-rise.
the mid-rise proposals.
And can I suggest another little amendment? I hope you take on, councillor
Well,
Burke.
just wait
This one?
until we,
Yeah.
until.
Do this one then.
That North Sydney Council is strongly right to apply for the same release as other councils seeking exemption from mid-rise in the R3 zone.
To avoid jarring transitions between the various low and mid-rise zones.
I just had another suggestion a moment. That's okay, councillor.
Yes, it's seconded by councillor Burke, but just wait until we're doing this in a way so that everyone understands. Okay, are you happy with that as written and the seconder? Yeah. Okay,
Can I
councillor
just-
Gibson.
Look, and I do congratulate councillor Spenceley and councillor Burke for bringing this forward. Just in point 5 and 6, I don't think it's emphasising the sense of urgency enough. I think we, can we add in the word? We actually need an urgent review. And I think we need to state a timeline there when we expect to have the results of this review back before council. Could you just add a date in there, councillor Spenceley? This is urgent. Let's.
I'm happy to include the word urgent. I'm not
Yep.
sure setting a date. I mean, I don't know the timeframe that we can do this in.
Well,
But
we
I'd say
should
like, if the word urgent in there, I think the
Let's put the
council
word
staff will
urgent
understand.
in,
Yeah.
but we should be expecting this back, I would say within a month.
Well, I think the word urgent would summarise that.
Right,
I
good, let's
suspect. I'm
pop in
comfortable.
urgent. Tim,
Thank
can you
you.
take that on?
Yeah.
Is that okay, councillor Burt?
Thank you. Would you also take on an 8? Oh, sorry, would you also take on an 8, which is which recognises that there's actually been some changing circumstances, not least that the housing targets have now been released, and that we provide an urgent supplementary submission on the low to mid-rise housing reforms. That sets out that between the 15th of December when they were announced and the 23rd of February when council made its oppositional submission, that we now have, as of the 29th of May, new housing targets to meet in a 5-year period, which is 5,900 completed dwellings in 5 years. I think that we should be submitting that they abandon the low to mid-rise housing reforms, whether it's for the whole state or whether it's just for North Sydney, and allow council to undertake place-based planning to meet the housing targets within the 5-year period.
Can I just suggest that council agrees that it will meet the target and therefore?
Well, I think we should be strongly saying abandon your low to mid-rise housing reforms, because we don't want those coming in over the top of the housing target.
Absolutely. I was just agreeing with saying, I think if we abandon the low to mid-rise, note the 5,900 and that council is comfortable meeting that with its own place-based.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, that we provide an urgent supplementary submission to Department of Planning, urging them to abandon the low to mid-rise housing reforms in circumstances in which housing targets were issued on 29th of May. (2024). And task councils to work with communities to plan for that, to plan to meet those targets. If you're happy to take that on, councillor Burke.
Mayor, I understand where you're going with that, and I'm broadly supportive. I think it will mean that there's so little chance of that happening with this department and government. I think it slightly distracts from what we're trying to achieve for Neutral Bay, but I will support it, but just.
Well, I think we can do both. I think we
Yeah.
can walk and talk at the same time. And the fact is that these reforms, as they apply to Neutral Bay, are part of the low to mid-rise housing reforms that apply across the whole state. And there have been changed circumstances since we put in our submission. And those circumstances actually support the position that we have resolved, which is allow our council, all councils, to work with their communities to meet targets. They've now issued the targets. So
can I suggest that we do it on behalf of this council? I think we're much more likely to achieve a result for this council than making it an issue for all councils.
I agree.
well, I'm just saying that we put it on behalf of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, the way it's written, it just mentions councils. So I think if the plural is just
the
taken out.
plural out.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you prepared to take that on as seconder, councillor Burke? Thank you. Councillor Spencer, it's your motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, and thank you to the community. We're here today because there's been a breakdown in procedure between council staff and councillors. And I think I want to reiterate that this is not about an individual, this is not about individual staff, but a breakdown in process of the council in general. Staff, in my interactions, are of incredibly high quality and produce excellent work. I think this is just a breakdown potentially in context and definitely in process. Context is important. The response and the agenda from the general manager shows, a breakdown in context. Council staff viewed this form as a discussion document for a workshop. Other councils have viewed this document as an important submission document and tabled it to their councils. Context is important. If I say red, someone might think of a red light, someone might think of red wine. But I think in practicalities, this form is particularly clear. And this form is particularly damaging if viewed without context. This form is live now within the Department of Planning. It has a circle around yes. We need to rescind this document formally and follow our community's desire, which is to defend and proactively and transparently document why Neutral Bay is not suitable. I'm particularly disappointed in the General Manager's response to this agenda item, as it continues to downplay the issue and it continues to support why Neutral Bay should be included or why it's difficult to exclude Neutral Bay. This is not the direction the community wants us to go. The community's view is very clear. There are a number of reasons why we can exclude Neutral Bay, a number of valid reasons. And from this point forward, depending on the vote, I think it's imperative that council staff get on board with the message that council is delivering, with the message that the community is delivering. No more should we be writing about why it should be included or why it's difficult to include it. We should be writing why it should be excluded. I think the second point is around transparency. I, as a councillor, found out about this because of a community member's research. When there is a breakdown in procedures of this magnitude, affecting this many people and the lives of homeowners, residents, renters, and people in the area, thousands of people, this should have immediately been brought to the attention of council staff and of the community. We talk a lot about transparency at this council, and thanks to Mayor Baker, I think we have a very strong record of transparency. But when it truly matters, when a matter comes to this point, when it's so important, I think we have failed. If we look at the motion, it's quite simple today. The motion is to rescind the document that was erroneously submitted. I thank Mayor Baker for her letter to the Secretary of the DPHI, noting council's position, but we need to go further than that. We don't need to note council's position. We need to resubmit the document, resubmit our position, which is Neutral Bay is not to be included, and justify the reasons why it's not to be included. That is the motion today. We need to do more. We need to do more for our community. I think we've heard the community at the response I've received and the response at precincts meetings is one of outrage. And if our community is outraged, this is when we need to deliver a strong and solid response, taking responsibility for the actions that have happened, repairing it and moving forward, supporting the community. Until we take responsibility, General Manager, I don't believe we are dealing properly with this issue. This is not a witch hunt. No individual is to blame, but there is a breakdown in process that we need to repair and we need to take responsibility for. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Councillor Gibson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Spenceley. Now, Councillor Spenceley said he's disappointed in some of the actions from the General Manager. I have to say, I'm disappointed in our Mayor. And the Mayor is the leader of this organisation. You put your hand up to take on the role of Mayor. You must be on top of what is happening in your council. I'm sorry. And I also think this comes down to the basic fact that we no longer have a full-time Mayor. A mayor should be
Point
in
of
the
order,
office.
Mayor, this is completely irrelevant
It is
to the
not
discussion.
irrelevant. It is not irrelevant.
It is.
Councillor,
is.
but councillor,
Thank
the
you. Time,
assistant,
Mayor is
Councillor-
irrelevant.
assistant chair, sit down.
No,
Now-
no,
the-
sorry, councillor Gibson. There has one of the main roles, one of the roles of mayor is to chair the meetings effectively, and
Well,
that means
you
to
could-
rule on
Well,
rule.
keep,
That is to rule on points of order, if you would allow me to do so. First of all, I'm going to clarify the leader of the role of the mayor as leader is not to be the chief executive of the council and involve themselves in the operational matters in the way that you are suggesting. But in any event, I will rule against the point of order. It is open to councillor Gibson to seek to blame whoever she wishes to.
Good, thank
If
you.
she's not moving into defamatory matters, then I will allow it. But I would suggest that you address the substance of the matters that are before us.
Okay, and I would note that once again, Mayor, you've used up most of my 5 minutes.
Councillor
Okay.
Gibson, you know how meetings are run.
Yes, and you use up my time every time, Mayor. The clock should actually stop when you're giving me a lecture. But I would like to say.
Again, councillor Gibson, I'm going to call you to order. Again, the clock did stop. You can see it, that it's stopped now. And again, let's move on to the substance of the matter that's before us,
Well-
rather than these trivial matters.
Okay.
Thank you.
The matter that's before us is there's been a total breakdown in process. I'm sorry, councillors, but when we have a full-time mayor, a mayor that is in the office every day, this sort of oversight doesn't happen. And we have a total lack of transparency in this council. I'm sitting here in a meeting where we're discussing this important matter, and the mayor and councillor Berrigy are writing notes to each other.
Again, I'm going to
Why-
call,
why-
I'm going.
why isn't that shared?
Councillor Gibson, I'm going to call you to order. Look, just address the issue before us.
But
The motion
issue
is
a lack of
clear.
transparency, Mayor. The issue is a lack of transparency and a lack of communication between the mayor and other councillors. I don't know when the mayor knew about this, but the mayor and councillor Berrigy sit here passing notes to each other. It's most unusual process. Usually the mayor is chairing the meeting and the councillors and they don't have their fellow team members sitting next to them, giving them assistance. This council is operating.
Again, I'm going to call you to order. That is,
Okay, I'm just-
you are again imputing improper motives under clause 1511D of the Code of Meeting Practice. You are out of order and I ask that you withdraw
Well,
and
I think it's out,
apologise.
no, I think it's out of order that you're passing notes to each other without us
Councillor
knowing what's
Gibson,
happening.
Councillor Gibson, I've asked you to withdraw and apologise.
No,
Again, you're
I
doing.
won't withdraw and apologise for pointing out that you're sitting there passing.
I'm not
notes.
sitting here
It's-
passing notes. If Councillor Gibson,
I
if you would.
just saw you
I've
passing
called you,
notes,
I've
Mayor.
called you to order. And I've asked that you withdraw and apologise. Once again, you indulge in personal attack rather
I've
than
just
address
put-
any
no.
policy matter.
I am pointing out a fact that you're passing notes to each other, which I think is
Point
improper.
point of order,
practice.
point of
It's
order.
not improper
Mayor,
practice.
we're here to discuss a far more important matter than whether or not someone is passing notes to someone else. Can we please get back to the?
Well, I
subject
am.
at
This
hand?
is about a
Coun-
lack of transparency.
Councillor-
A lack of
Councillor-
transparency
Councillor-
between the
okay.
leader of the organisation and the councillors.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't know anything about this till I'm overseas and I get a phone call from councillor Spenceley filling me in on what's happening. The mayor didn't immediately send around an email telling councillors what was happening. That's the role of the mayor. The mayor should have been on top of this first, and it shouldn't have been up to councillor Spenceley or councillor Burke or councillor Mutton, who kindly called me when I was overseas to let me know what was happening. And again, I stress very clearly, we need a full-time mayor so that someone is on top of what is happening in this organisation. And I'm very disappointed I'm disappointed the mayor didn't immediately send out a broadcast to all councillors. It was left to councillor Spenceley and councillor Burke. It's simply not good enough. I just don't know how any of this mess actually happened, but I'll be certainly looking forward to the response, the independent response into how this mess happened. But The leader of the organisation has to take responsibility when mess happens. The pool.
Thank
Yes,
you.
the pool,
Sorry,
yes. Councillor Berrick is calling out.
Councillor Gibson, I'm going
Councillor
to call,
Berrick is calling out.
Councillor
That's
Gibson,
another mess. Another mess the mayor has to.
Councillor Gibson.
Yeah.
I'm calling you to order. Would you take your seat? And
Councillor
Councillor,
Berrick to order.
Councillor Gibson, I'm calling everyone to order. Are there any other speakers on this item? Councillor Berrick.
Sorry, councillor Burke.
Councillor Burke.
Oh, wait.
No, it's all right, you were first.
Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, firstly, thanks to our community for being here on a Tuesday morning. It's not an easy thing to come and take part of your day out, but we appreciate your interest in these matters. Obviously, why are we here? We're here because an important and urgent matter was brought to our attention by our community. So on behalf of concerned community members, I'm here to try and help properly understand what has happened. A motion in February resolved that we would not nominate any town centre or village for the state government's low and mid-rise planning agenda. That is an agenda with no mandate at all in our state. I'll repeat that, no mandate from our state government. So in particular, and in response to community consultation and feedback, we agreed that Neutral Bay should not be nominated specifically. Yeah, so unfortunately, the station and town centre selection form lodged with DPHI in May included Neutral Bay with a yes and justification as to why yes, to include the low and mid-rise planning agenda. So that's basically why we're here today. It came out at a precinct meeting, which was not an ideal way for us to find out about these issues. We weren't told clearly as councillors that's not acceptable. Ku-ring-gai Council felt this form important enough to table at a council meeting, and I applaud that. It says a lot about the importance of that form, that it was tabled at a council meeting. So obviously in our agenda, I note that the document was referred to as a quote discussion paper. But frankly, the document is a quote station and town centre selection form, unquote. I believe if we give this DPHI an inch, they take a mile. So we have to be very careful about that. Every action of council, including this agenda, needs to really reflect the resolution of council and strongly reject the inclusion of Neutral Bay. Okay, so I don't think this is an immaterial form that can be brushed off. What context, as Councillor Spenceley said before, what context will people see this form with a big fat yes next to Neutral Bay? So it is an urgent situation. Are we out of time? We could, decisions are being made. This is urgent. In short, Neutral Bay should not be included, and there are strong reasons for not including Neutral Bay in this selection criteria. An EGM, I believe, is the most transparent start to this process, and a full rescission of the form enacted ASAP. So again, thanks to our precinct and community for alerting us to this issue. This has been driven by our community, and we are here to represent our community. If it wasn't uncovered, it's been said here tonight, would we have ever found out? So that's a question. I'm really happy to be part of opening this up for discussion. I hope we can improve our processes going forward. We do need to resolve and repair this as best we can for our community. And the bottom line in the agenda is that, quote, the response to the form should have been no, unquote. I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Berrigan.
I agree that it's awful that the form's gone in contrary to council's resolved position, and I don't think anybody is in any doubt that we have argued strongly strongly against Neutral Bay being included. I also argued strongly against the 12 stories that was pushed through in the last council meeting under Councillor Gibson's leadership. And that
Point of order, Mayor.
that's a
Sorry,
That is absolutely not true.
so Councillor Gibson, I gave you enormous leeway as you attacked me. I don't regard
didn't. I
I don't
pointed
regard
out what your
councillors, I don't
responsibilities
regard
were.
councillor Berrigy's characterisation of the previous rescinded Neutral Bay planning
It
study.
was 8 to
as being
12
wrong.
stories.
So
It wasn't
thank you.
12
8 to
stories.
12.
8 to
12.
12. 8 to
Thank
12.
you,
Up to
councillor.
12.
I ruled
8
against
to
your
12.
point of order. Thank you, councillor Berrigy. You have the floor.
Thank you. Where we had a planning study which allowed up to 12 stories in Neutral Bay, and we had to fight an election to have that removed. And in the last term of council, we had the commencement of the North Sydney Pool project, which was undertaken with very little consultation of any other councillors except 3 who signed the contract on New Year's Eve.
That is absolutely misrepresenting.
So again, Councillor
Councillor
Gibson, if you have a point of order, I would ask councillor Berrigy to again move to the substance of the motion.
I am,
before
I'm
us.
just
We're not
responding.
talking about.
Councillor Gibson, would you please refrain from speaking while the chair is? Again, councillor Berrigy, if you would continue. Again,
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm going to call you to order for your continual insults. You are in breach of the code of meeting practice with that, and I'm ruling you out of order on that. Thank you, councillor Gibson. Councillor Berrigy, if you would continue, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I make my statement, I just have a question to Councillor Spenceley. Councillor Spenceley, when you found out about this, did you call the Chief Executive Officer to ask how it might have happened?
If I may, through you, Mayor, no, I did not.
Right,
I
thank
viewed
you.
my
And
question.
did you call the Mayor to ask how
Sorry,
this might have
Point of
happened?
order, Mayor, am I on trial here? Am I
No,
not
no,
allowed
no,
to provide a
I'm
response?
trying to understand how you found out.
Okay, the questions were direct. You've answered the question. Thank you.
Sure. So if the question was, did I call the Chief Executive Officer? No, I did not, because I was not aware if it was the CEO's decision or not decision. I was made aware at a precinct meeting. I was not proactively informed by the council at all of
That
this
wasn't my
major
question.
failure of governance.
My question was, when you found out, did you call the CEO, the leader of the administration of the council, to ask what had happened and how it had happened?
No, because I was
No,
unaware of
thank you. So
who
I
was
found
involved
out
in the
as a
process.
councillor through social media. So I'm not sure really what's going on here, except what does appear to be a witch hunt, in my opinion, where you and Councillor Burke took no opportunity to contact the CEO, even contact the Mayor, before issuing a notice of motion, a motion of urgency that you were proposing to move, which was then circulated on social media. So I think if you really want to come into this with clean hands, I think you have to have clean hands. And whilst what happened with the form is regrettable, I think what happens is and I actually reflect a bit on a newsletter I just received from my son's school, which talked about how we deal with people who make an error. And what they say is we don't stand there, celebrate and hang people out for making an error when they are on the same team. We investigate how the error happened.
Order, Mayor.
And we work together.
Hold on.
Point of
What's the
order,
point of
Mayor.
order? What's the point?
There's no person being hung out. That's an inaccurate statement.
In your first motion, which is published on social media.
There's no
there is-
person.
Sorry, councillor Burke, councillor, you may not agree, but councillor Berrigy, like you, has a right to put her opinion. It's not out of order. Councillor Berrigy.
So whilst it's regrettable that this form's gone in, and it's regrettable that the word yes is there, I think the substance actually underpins that the council does not agree that Neutral Bay, and it is the actual problem with this whole system at the moment, the one size fits all criteria that council staff are being made to debate with the Department of Planning, and often having to sign confidentiality agreements to have discussions with the Department of Planning that they can't reveal to councillors. So the whole problem is the problem is the process. And instead of being one team arguing for our community, you are falling straight into the hands of the state government, who have decided that they are going to go with this one size fits all methodology, which sets people against each other, and now you're setting the council against itself. I find it amazing
Point of
that
order.
you would actually
Point
go
of order.
through.
Sorry, councillor
Councillor
Gibson, what is your point of order?
Councillor Berrigan is turning this to an attack on Councillor Spenceley and Councillor Burke, who've actually done their jobs.
Thank you,
Please,
I've got your
Can
point.
you please?
I've got your councillor.
Brain, your assistant chair.
Again, these imputations and personal insults are in fact out of order, councillor Gibson. Councillor Berrigan, could you resume and continue with your last 2 minutes?
Thank you, Mayor. So I have no issue with bringing the error on the form to the attention of anybody. But I would have thought the first person that you would go to would be the Chief Executive Officer to find out exactly what had happened, and also to find out what the role of the council was in these discussions with the state government. So what has happened now is that for some reason, I assume because an election is coming, we are out there trying to one-up each other all the time, and this is really unfortunate. I don't think there are any stronger advocates in this room against the state government housing reforms than the mayor and the council officers who have been in there arguing that black is white. And it is just absolutely, again, I'm not taking away from what happened, but I thought we were grown-ups. I thought we were adults. If this was a workplace, this would be workplace bullying. You are going after someone in an enormously public way, having not done your homework. And the first thing that anybody would do would be to ring the chief executive and ask how this could happen and find out, were they aware of it and what actions do they seek to take? Instead, you seem to want to drag the council into some kind of crisis. There is no crisis.
Point of order again,
There is
Mayor.
no crisis.
This is claiming improper motive
Yeah.
of the councillors.
Thank you.
Well, I'll go to
Thank
the
you.
North Sydney
Of
side.
saying it's about an election.
Okay, I understand your point of order. I'm going to rule in favour of councillor Burke's point of order and ask you to withdraw and apologise.
I withdraw and apologise, Mayor, if that was offensive. However, it is my opinion that running this in the media without coming to the actual head of the council, the general manager, the administration side, and asking before you did any of this is actually almost worse than what we're dealing with.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Santa.
Thank you, Mayor, and I rise to, I'm very conflicted on this. I agree entirely that we need to take the action that we're proposing, that has been proposed. But I am concerned at a procedural matter, similar to Councillor Berrigan. I'm an avid reader of the North Sydney Sun.
I'm not.
And the first I found out about this was reading in the Sun, exclusive claim that North Sydney Council green-lighted state-led development of Neutral Bay over councillors' opposition. Further in the article, it says, according to a certain councillor, who I won't cite, the council responded affirmatively for Neutral Bay, even listing reasons why it should be included. However, this was counter to the will of elected councillors who had voted on 12 February to oppose the designation of areas such as Neutral Bay. This was the first I learnt of this issue. And I'm concerned about this because this implies that council supported the inclusion of Neutral Bay in the New South Wales Government's housing development proposal under its town centre component against the opposition of some councillors. Further on in the article, it reveals that council as a whole at its meeting of 12 February did indeed oppose the designation, but there is still that false implication that council support against the opposition of at least the two councillors cited in the article is clearly there. If this issue were a matter of a council decision, as the article suggests, the last time I looked, the two councillors cited were in attendance at the February meeting and therefore would share some of the responsibility for the council's alleged malfeasance. Clearly, this is not the case. Rather, it's a matter of on the one hand, a clear council policy of opposition to inclusion of Neutral Bay in the government's housing policy, and its clear communication on more than one occasion, and I've seen what the Mayor has written and has said orally to the government, of its opposition to the Department of Planning, juxtaposed with the filling in of a form whose wording might be misconstrued by the department. Given this, I respectfully recommend to my learned council colleagues that the proper approach on this matter should have been with the council's CEO rather than through the media. This is a council staff issue, and I would suggest would have been more appropriately resolved through discussion with the Chief Executive. To go to the media and claim that council made such a decision, as the article alleges, is false and misleading, and I hope not deliberately undermining the integrity of the council. I also suggest that it would be appropriate for my fellow councillors to again contact the Sun and seek to redress the incorrect conclusion reached by that publication, pointing out the council's policy on this matter is clear and unequivocal opposition to inclusion of Neutral Bay in the government's proposed town centre development policy, and that this opposition has been strongly conveyed to the state government. Whatever the government decides on this matter, it will not be because the council decided in favour of Neutral Bay's inclusion in the policy. I agree that we should reaffirm an opposition to inclusion of Neutral Bay in the government's proposed development project to overcome any misunderstanding and equivocation on our part, on our views on this matter. I support the recommendation as amended.
Thank you. Councillor Welch.
I just want to say that I absolutely support the CEO, I support the mayor, and I support the council staff. I agree an error was made that should not have been made. Okay, but I also feel that it was egregious that two councillors, that in my opinion, it's egregious that two councillors went to social media to let the community know what was going on instead of going to the CEO.
Point of order, Mayor. Two councillors didn't go to social media. That's factually
I'll
incorrect.
withdraw that. I'm
So,
going from what was in the
Thank you.
the author
The
of
point
the
of order has
article
been
in the-
upheld and it's been withdrawn, and apologise if you.
In my opinion, this was an appalling abuse of action. As a previous union delegate, my role was to advocate for my peers. In my opinion, this was a sickening form of bullying towards a group who are unable to publicly defend themselves. In my opinion, going to the press could be viewed.
Sorry, point of order, Mayor. Councillor Welsh is now talking about bullying. Who's been bullied here? This is
Thank
simply
you,
ridiculous.
Councillor Gibson.
I think she should withdraw and
I-
apologise those statements.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Welsh, if you'll proceed.
Okay, I support the amended recommendation.
Thank you. Before I give you your right of reply, I'm going to speak very briefly. First of all, I'm going to address the process. Like everyone around this table, I discovered the error via an email from a resident. And like everyone around the table, when I received that email, I was outraged that the error had been made and it had been submitted on council's behalf. But as a councillor, conscious of my role under the Local Government Act, the first thing I did was forward the copy of the form and seek some advice from the Chief Executive. And at the same time, in parallel, I immediately wrote to the Secretary of the Department of Planning and clarified and corrected the record. And the correction is to say that it's the council's submission that was resolved on the 12th of February and that was sent by letter on the 23rd of February. That is council's position on Neutral Bay, but also on every other centre in the local government area. Because the fact is, and we heard from Mr. Mackenzie, that we are the most dense, third most dense place in the state. We have been doing the lifting in terms of meeting housing targets. We aren't, in fact, when it comes to low to mid-rise, the Minister for Planning uses North Sydney as examples of density done well. Our position remains the same, which is this ridiculous one-size-fits-all exceptionally poor planning response must not stand. What I will say is that we now have an opportunity, and so I will say, as Ms. Trevelyan-Jones said, the submission of the form was wrong, and I understand entirely why residents would feel appalled and angry. And Councillor Spencer is also right. It's the context in which these forms are read. But it is a single form that was required for discussion. We've had an account of the discussion, and clearly in the Chief Executive Officer's note, council planning staff were putting all of the arguments that we have canvassed today around why Neutral Bay ought not to be included as part of their discussions with the department. But as Councillor Beregi said, this is the terrible process and strategy of divide and conquer that the Department of Planning offers the state of New South Wales on all of these housing reforms. It puts council officers in a particularly onerous position. My personal view is that we should not have submitted the form at all, that the response should have been, see our submission dated 23rd of February. That said, we have corrected the record, and we will now make it exceptionally clear to the state government exactly why Neutral Bay isn't. My concern is that there are other places in North Sydney that may not feel they've had the same level of advocacy, Waverton, North Sydney, Camaray, as Neutral Bay is now receiving. I think that's why it's important that we say to the state government, abandon these low to mid-rise housing reforms in North Sydney. It impacts the entirety of the 10.5 square kilometres, and it's unsuitable because we're, one, already the most dense, and two, we are doing the work to address the housing targets. I would ask, just before we finally put this to the vote, if the mover and seconder would take on a further item, which is that council publish on council's website all existing and any future correspondence and submissions on the housing reforms. That makes it very clear that the transparency is there. And the final thing in terms of my role was that, having written that letter on the 11th and you attending a precinct meeting on the 12th, in between meetings, when it's appropriate, I write to various parts of the state government. I also then provide you with and table it at the next available council meeting. We haven't yet had that. So if you would take on that additional point, I think it means that going forward that there's some trust about transparency and accountability on these issues for the community to see exactly and councillors, exactly what is being submitted on our behalf.
Thank you, Mayor. I welcome the addition. Yep.
Likewise, thank you, Mayor.
With that amendment, you have the right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm happy to wear personal attacks. I'm happy to wear any form of disagreement with the process and my actions, but I think this is a distraction. This is a wild distraction.
Yes.
To quote Councillor Santa, the form might have been misconstrued. Might have been misconstrued. We circled a giant yes on a form that says low and mid-rise housing station and town centre selection form. This form does not say discussion document. This form does not say purely for the purposes of illustration. It does not ask the council to comment on if the criteria is met. In fact, it asks the reverse, to contribute if the criteria is not met. So it's a massive distraction to attack me. Councillor Santa, it might not be misconstrued, right? It is exceedingly clear. Please stop the political games. This is a clear document that affects thousands of people. And well, may you snigger, Councillor Beregi. This affects people's lives.
I was not sniggering, and I would like you to
Okay.
withdraw and
You were.
apologise.
So-
I was not sniggering.
You certainly were.
Mayor,
So
I asked
Councillor-
to rule whether a snigger was in fact a snigger.
Well, I'm not ruling on a snigger. Again, we're devolving away from the substance of the issue. Would you continue with your
Thank you.
right of reply?
So Councillor Welch describes this as a small error made. I don't think the people of Neutral Bay believe this is a small error. I don't think we should believe this is a small error. This is a process that's been ongoing for a long time.
Point of order. I said an error.
Yeah.
I didn't say small error.
No,
I said an
and-
error.
And thank you, that if you would correct.
Sure,
and
correct the
withdraw
record.
that,
An
correct.
error was made, but this is an error that is serious, that affects thousands of people.
Bless you.
Councillor Berrigan says there is no crisis here. Well, ask the Neutral Bay residents if this is a crisis.
I do.
I've been in the precinct meetings in the last two weeks, and this is a crisis for the residents of Neutral Bay. The people who live in the area, this is the biggest crisis since the 8 and 12 stories. To describe the fact that I commented to a reporter about the incident might be worse than what has happened, a form that selects Neutral Bay to be included in the town's centre housing reform policy, again, misdirects the issue here. This is a major issue. We need to fix it. Please stop with the political games and focus on the issue here, which is we will be judged by our community on how strongly we defend Neutral Bay and, to the Mayor's comment, other areas. The line is here today, council staff, General Manager and councillors. We will be judged collectively on how we react to this and the strong case that we put together to defend why Neutral Bay should not be included. This is about transparency. Councillor Santa talks about why he's upset that he found out by social media. I'm going to comment that I'm upset that I had to find out at a precinct meeting. Transparency means when you find an error of this magnitude affecting this amount of people, you react. You call a meeting, you inform, you comment, and you provide transparency. I applaud the Mayor for having been a beacon of transparency this entire council term, one that I've learnt a lot from, and I appreciate that. And I do appreciate the amendment to this motion seeking to make all discussions on this matter clear and transparent to the community. But we have to stop here. We have to take responsibility and we have to take some actions. Our community deserves it. Please focus on this. Thank you.
Okay, I put the item. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. That brings the meeting to the close.
I just have a motion of urgency, if I may, to be considered.
If you put it, and I'll
Sure.
rule whether or not it's a matter.
There's been a lot of comment on social media, a lot of people asking about the pool and when the pool will be ready. I think it's an urgent motion that I would like to put that says that council provides clear updates, regular updates on the expected date the pool will be ready, the final estimated cost of the build, and that the council provides regular updates through many forums to make aware the community.
Councillor Spenceley, I'm not going to rule that as a matter of urgency. There is a public update on the pool on the agenda for the Monday meeting.
Yep.
Thank you. That brings the meeting to the close.
Recording stopped.